I was just a girl who started out knowing nothing about real estate after college, and I've since built a company with over 500 million in assets. If I told myself how hard it was going to be to develop institutional real estate, there's no way I would have ever gotten to where I was today. You know, when you get into institutional real estate and you're starting to develop bigger projects, normally the project developer has to have 10% equity in the deal. So if it's a $50 million project, then you need 20 million in equity, and I would have to have $2 million. I started out with no money, and I actually, by cold calling, happened to find an investor that would put in all the money for me if I did all of the work. And he ended up cutting a deal with me like that. And had I known and done any research and talked to tons of people, they would have told me that I need a bunch of money to start in real estate. But I didn't. And I think that, not knowing how bad things can or how hard things are from the beginning, kind of having a little bit of ignorance and, dreamlike mentality at the beginning of a goal or career is really important, because if you listen to any entrepreneur story, there's a million barriers that pop up. But if you have that goal, that big goal in mind, and you're going to attain it, then you're much more likely to persevere than most people. I'm Meg, and I built a real estate development company with no money, no family in the business, no connections, no MBA, and no real educational experience that prepared me for real estate development. It just was a lot of grit, but I've full circled more than $300 million in real estate, meaning, built from the ground up and sold. And I did that all without any formal training or experience. So what I can say is you have to start with a really big goal and really make this real to you. So when I first started and I decided I wanted to be in real estate, my background was in finance in college, and I was going to go work for a job, building some spreadsheets all day, kind of being an analyst like all of my friends were going off to doing, and it just felt wrong. And senior year, I spent some time in Barcelona studying abroad, and I got very interested in architecture. And I used that time to really understand and delve into my passion of architecture and building. And I would read tons of books about architecture. I would cut out magazine articles and pictures and make collages. And I really kind of set up a big dream board for what I wanted to do. And I knew I wanted to develop residential real estate. And that's when I really solidified this goal. And I would wake up thinking about it, and I would draw out my dream house, and I knew, and I would spend all this time sort of mocking up, what I wanted my career to look like or what I wanted my big goal to be. And I didn't have it all figured out. It's not like somebody, if they would have told me, hey, you would have developed industrial real estate and apartment buildings in 8 years from now, and you're going to live in Nashville, Tennessee, and launching your own hotel brand, I would have had no idea what that meant. But I just knew that I was going to do something big in real estate, and that my passion had to do with design and architecture and development. So one thing I would say is when you're making a big goal, don't worry about all of the reasons why you can't get there and how it's going to work out and who's going to fund it and all of those things. You have to start with a dream-like mentality with your goals. And that can be, doing a vision board or talking with your, really good colleague or spouse about this big dream and really making it real and just looking at what you want in the end, not really looking at all of the logistics. So I knew I wanted to do something very big in real estate, but I didn't know exactly what that meant. I didn't know. My specialty now includes short-term rental condos. Short-term rental and Airbnb wasn't even around when I was first starting. But I knew that I would corner a market and make it my own, and that it would involve high design, and that people would really love living in the product type that I build, and that I would be offering something unique to the market. I didn't know what that was, and I'm not saying you don't have to do a ton of research and a ton of work to figure that out. But first, start with a very big goal that makes you happy and sparks your imagination and gets you super excited to work towards it. That's the first step. Secondly, you have to will this into fruition. So that means that you have to be willing to put in the work to make this come true. And I would say that you have to roll up your sleeves and just start working towards it. You will encounter a million barriers. So when I first started, I didn't have any capital. I had to call about 1,000 people to get my first development started. And I literally just put in on Google, like, how do you find investors for real estate? That was my strategy. And I found certain lists of investors. One I bought for like $700 on familyoffices.com, I think. And another was a directory I found through a professional commercial real estate group. They had a directory, and that's where I met my first investor. But I had to call and I talked to, realistically, probably 500 people before I found someone that would invest in my very first deal. Now, that investor happened to not make me put in capital, and that sort of aligned with my situation. And it was very beneficial for him, and the project ended up being a total success. We've done 4 or 5 projects together, but he really took a chance on me, and I had to find the right person for the investment. And that was the first step towards having this big dream come true. Now, again, if I had known everything about commercial real estate or how hard it was, or I'd talked to a bunch of people that, were dismayed by the 2008 crash, because I started in 2008, then I don't think I would have gotten to where I am today. So I think at some point, like, you have to remain dreamlike and imaginative and really keep that big picture end goal in mind without worrying about, logic, because logic and people self-construct their own barriers. I'm not saying that the School of Hard Knocks was the easiest way for me to learn all of these things. Maybe if I got a little bit more formal training, I would have made less mistakes. But generally, you can get education and roll up your sleeves and be working towards something and really being innovative without needing to have, quote unquote, an MBA or needing to have a college degree or all of the things that society tells you that you have to have in order to be successful. A lot of times it's really just about the hard work and intelligence of really looking at what's needed and wanted in a market and providing it. But I watch people, especially young people, kind of self-construct their own barriers because they've been told by society that they have to be XYZ or do this to achieve this. I'm a living example that, you don't need an MBA. I didn't need money. I didn't need family connections to start my own company and be successful, at least in America. And that's like a big blessing that we have here. And I think that especially younger people have a hard time grasping just diving in and doing the work to get something done and not telling themselves that, they can't do something. And I think that we can all take that lesson from entrepreneurship. Now, entrepreneurship's not for everyone. It takes a ton of perseverance. It takes a ton of hard work. But I think that if you really want something, it's very, very important to stop focusing on the reasons why it's so hard to get. I've actually met many people, or even had people that work for me that were much smarter, much more set up, much more educated, quote unquote, and just, were working for me and making a 10th or 100th of what I would make in a year. Now that's fine because they have a lot more security, in terms of getting a steady paycheck, and maybe that's not their plan. But the point is that we all have innate abilities that, can be built upon, and it's really up to you to foster them and not make other people responsible for your success. I remember one time where one of my very first projects I ever got into, I was running by a job site and I saw a sign that said for sale by owner. I called the sign and I got involved in a project with another developer, and he wanted, $1 million towards this project. So I went online and I just borrowed, raised money from everybody I knew, and, went online and I posted and raised capital, and I gave him this money. And that's where I became an investor in my very first condo project in Nashville. And I thought it was that simple. I ended up having to redesign the entire building. I had to get him out of the partnership. I had to restructure a capital stack. These were all things that I had no idea how to do. But when faced with a lot of pressure, I just took one thing at a time and I sought good counsel and I worked with my architect and I worked with my contractor and I really had to figure things out. But if someone told me 2 years before that I was going to have to do all that and that it was going to be super stressful in the end, and I didn't know how much money I was going to make and I was going to be, faced with all these challenges, I probably wouldn't have started it. And then, I think that leads to being mediocre. But because I did that, I was able to do it again and again. And that was a $25 million deal. Then I did a $50 million deal. Now I'm working on a $300 million deal. And it's the same exact process of, building something from the ground up, getting an architect involved, using a general contractor, using sales, all of those things. So I think that the lesson here is that you have to have a really big goal to work towards, that you don't worry about exactly how you're going to achieve it. I just knew I was going to do something revolutionary and be very successful in commercial real estate. That's what I knew. I had no idea that I would end up across the country from where I, grew up in California. I now live in Nashville, and I developed all sorts of real estate. And my specialty is in short-term rental condos when Airbnb wasn't even around when I started, right? So just don't get distracted by all of the logistics. Start with something that you can get really, really excited about, and then just dive in and start working towards it. And that, doing research and working towards it, you'll realize how much time and effort it takes. But if you have your vision, you will get there. And don't let your own mental barriers get in the way of achieving great things. You just have to start with that vision and get busy working towards it. If you found this helpful, please check out my next video for how I walked away from a deal I believed in by clicking here.